It starts with a moment that almost everyone has seen, even if they don't remember the full context anymore. The night felt like any other major award show. Bright lights, loud crowds, carefully planned speeches, and artists waiting for their names to be called. Then suddenly, everything shifts. Kanye West walks onto the stage, interrupting Taylor Swift in what instantly becomes one of the most talked about moments in award show history. At the time, the reaction was immediate and brutal. People called it disrespectful, chaotic, even career-ending behavior. It looked like a spontaneous outburst, something unpredictable and unnecessary. But what made the moment stick wasn't just the interruption itself, it was what he said. Instead of focusing on the award, instead of letting the moment belong to Taylor, he redirected attention toward Beyoncé, insisting that her video deserved recognition. For years, that clip lived online as nothing more than a viral incident, something people replayed for shock value. But over time, the way people interpreted it began to shift. When you watch it again now, knowing everything that came after, it doesn't feel as simple. It feels intentional. Almost like the moment wasn't just about interruption, but redirection. And that's where the conversation begins to change. Because once people stop seeing it as random, they start asking different questions. Why Beyoncé? Why in that exact moment? Why redirect the spotlight so aggressively? These aren't questions that were taken seriously back then, but today, they're part of a much bigger discussion. What once looked like chaos now looks to some people like a clue. A moment that didn't make sense at the time, but might connect to something larger. And whether that's true or not, the fact that people are reanalyzing it years later tells you everything you need to know about how powerful that moment really was. Once that moment is brought back into focus, something else starts to stand out. Something that doesn't rely on one viral clip, but instead builds slowly over time. It's not loud, it's not dramatic, but once you notice it, it's hard to ignore. Award after award, speech after speech, different artists from completely different backgrounds step onto the stage. Some are new, some are legends, some are having the biggest moment of their lives. And yet, despite all those differences, many of them end up doing the same thing. They mention Beyoncé, not casually, not in passing, but with emotion, intensity, sometimes even reverence. Lizzo becomes visibly overwhelmed while speaking about her. Adele goes as far as reshaping her own moment to highlight Beyoncé's impact. Even established icons like Mary J. Blige continue to acknowledge her in ways that feel consistent. And that consistency is what catches people's attention. Because in most industries, recognition usually follows a certain direction. Artists thank mentors, teams, or those who directly contributed to their journey. But here, something feels different. The pattern doesn't follow the usual structure. It repeats across years, across genres, across completely separate moments. That's when the internet starts doing what it always does, compiling clips, lining them up, comparing reactions. Individually, each moment makes sense. Together, they start to feel connected. And that's the key difference. A single moment is easy to explain. A pattern is harder to dismiss. So the question becomes unavoidable. Is this simply the result of one artist having an unmatched level of influence? Or is it something about the industry itself? Something that shapes how people respond in those moments? There's no clear answer. But the repetition keeps the conversation alive. Because the more it happens, the less it feels like coincidence, and the more it feels like something people are trying to understand. As soon as patterns start forming, the internet moves fast. It doesn't wait for confirmation. It doesn't wait for official explanations. It starts connecting dots, sometimes accurately, sometimes not, but always with intensity. Clips resurface. Interviews that were once ignored suddenly gain attention. Conversations that seemed random at the time now feel like they might be part of something bigger. And as people dig deeper, certain names begin to appear again and again. Not necessarily because they're directly connected, but because they exist within the same space of influence. Names like Jay-Z, Diddy, and Erykah Badu start showing up in discussions that go far beyond music. Conversations about power, access, and what happens behind closed doors begin to blend with entertainment narratives. And this is where things become less about facts and more about perception. Because once people believe there's a connection, they start interpreting everything through that lens. Neutral moments feel intentional. Coincidences feel planned. And suddenly, the conversation isn't just about music anymore. It's about influence at the highest level. What makes this stage so powerful is that it doesn't require proof to grow. It feeds on curiosity. The more people look, the more they find. And the more they find, the more convinced they become that there's something worth uncovering. Whether that's true or not becomes almost secondary, because at this point, the narrative has already taken shape, and once a narrative forms online, it spreads faster than any single piece of information ever could. One of the most talked about pieces of this entire discussion revolves around something that, on the surface, seems completely normal. The idea of a stage persona isn't new. Artists across every genre have created alternate identities to separate their personal lives from their performances. But in this case, the conversation goes deeper. When Beyoncé described her onstage identity, known as Sasha Fierce, she explained it as something that allows her to transform during performances. Something that gives her the confidence and energy needed to command massive audiences. For most people, that explanation makes sense. It fits within the psychology of performance. But online, interpretations begin to shift. Instead of seeing it as a tool, some begin to see it as something more symbolic, something that represents a separation between the artist and the performer. And once again, perception changes everything. Because when people are already looking for patterns, even normal concepts can start to feel layered. The idea of transformation becomes something to analyze. The language used to describe it becomes something to question. This doesn't mean there's anything unusual happening, but it does show how quickly a simple explanation can evolve into a complex discussion when viewed through a different lens. And that's what keeps this topic alive. Not confirmation, but interpretation. At this stage, the conversation shifts again. It moves away from patterns and into something less structured, rumors. And rumors behave differently. They don't need consistency. They don't need logic. They spread because they're intriguing. Stories begin to circulate about behind-the-scenes moments, about environments that feel different, about experiences that people claim are difficult to explain. None of these stories are verified. Many contradict each other, but they all share one thing in common. They add to the mystery. And once rumors enter the conversation, everything becomes amplified. Every detail feels significant. Every coincidence feels intentional. The narrative becomes more intense, even if the foundation becomes less clear. This is where it becomes important to separate what is known from what is assumed. Because while rumors can be compelling, they don't always reflect reality. But they do influence how people think, and that influence is powerful. What makes this conversation so persistent isn't just the names involved, and it's not just the moments people keep replaying. It's the way everything connects over time. Slowly, subtly, and in a way that keeps pulling people back in, even when they think they've moved on from it. Because think about how most viral topics work. They explode, dominate attention for a few days, maybe a few weeks, and then they disappear, replaced by the next headline, the next controversy, the next trend. But this doesn't disappear. It fades out, and then comes right back, again and again. And every time it returns, it feels slightly different. Like there's something new to notice, something new to question. And a big part of that comes down to how people process patterns. When one moment happens, it's easy to dismiss. When two similar moments happen, it's coincidence. But when those moments start stacking, across years, across different artists, across completely separate situations, that's when people stop seeing isolated events and start seeing connections. Not because they're told to, but because the human mind is wired to look for them. That's exactly what's happening here. You've got a moment involving Kanye West that people are still analyzing years later. You've got repeated award speeches where artists bring up Beyoncé in ways that feel emotionally charged and, to some viewers, unusually consistent. You've got conversations resurfacing online that tie in other major figures like Jay-Z and Diddy, not as confirmed connections, but as part of the same larger discussion about influence. And what makes it even more powerful is the timeline. These aren't moments that all happened at once. They're spread out, years apart, different contexts, different situations. But when they're placed next to each other, when clips are compiled, when conversations are revisited, they start to feel connected in a way they didn't before. That's how narratives form, not from one big reveal, but from a series of smaller moments that only make sense when viewed together. And once that narrative begins to take shape, it becomes self-sustaining, because now every new moment gets filtered through it. Every award speech, every interview, every public appearance gets analyzed a little more closely. People start paying attention to details they might have ignored before: tone, wording, reactions, timing. Even completely normal behavior can start to feel significant when it's viewed through that lens. And that's where perception becomes more powerful than facts. Because at this stage, it's not about proving anything. It's about how things feel when they're observed over time. It's about the sense that there's a pattern, even if that pattern can be explained in multiple ways. Some people look at it and see nothing unusual. They see respect for one of the most influential artists of a generation. They see admiration, inspiration, and a natural acknowledgement of impact. Others look at the exact same moments and feel like there's something more to it, something harder to define. Not necessarily something hidden, but something that hasn't been fully understood. And both perspectives continue to exist at the same time. That tension, that gap between explanation and curiosity, is what keeps the conversation alive. Because there's no clear conclusion, no definitive answer that shuts everything down. Just a series of moments that keep resurfacing, each one adding another layer to the discussion. And maybe that's the real reason this never goes away. Not because of what's proven, but because of what remains unanswered. Because when something keeps reappearing across time, across people, and across completely different situations, people don't just scroll past it. They stop, they look again, and they start asking questions all over again.